in that city, and that's adjusting for socioeconomic impacts. So, we don't think about all of the benefits that trees are providing to us every day, but they are absolutely caring for you. And so it's incredible to think about, our relationship and the reciprocity when we care for them. And so in case you are feeling stressed, if you were like me and getting here tonight was a little bit of a challenge, 20 minutes in nature can significantly reduce your cortisol and other stress hormones. And yes, they have absolutely checked, and urban green spaces do count. It's slightly better outcomes if you're going to make it to, Mount Rainier National Park or something like that, but you absolutely can get the benefits just from your neighborhood park. And it doesn't even have to be like a Seward or a Magnuson or one of our great, Discovery Park. So there's many, many benefits to our urban forest. Sometimes you hear us talk a lot about canopy cover, and what is canopy cover when we're talking about it. So imagine that you are a bird flying over Seattle, and you're looking down at the city. The percentage of the ground in the summer, not right now, the percentage of the ground in the summer that's obscured by tree leaves, branches, that is the canopy cover. And so in 2016, I actually just got an email about this today. We are updating our canopy numbers ASAP. We're looking into what we want to ask, basically, from our statisticians and from the people who analyze LiDAR. But we know in 2016 we had 28% canopy cover in the city, so over the entire city. But of course we know that that's not true in all neighborhoods, right? And so that is across Seattle, the entire city had a 28% canopy cover. So when you think of Seattle's forest, I wonder what you're picturing in your mind. Because when I came to this place, this was what I pictured. This is where I wanted to say, I'll admit, I'm a transplant from the South. You can't hear it in my voice. But I was blown away the first time I went to Lincoln Park. And I was incredibly bowled over the first time I saw old growth at Seward. And I knew that I wanted to live here. That's really real stories there. And so when I think about Seattle's forest, that's what I think about. And it makes sense. I mean, I hope, since you're all here, that this is really beautiful to you. But this isn't where Seattle's forest is. Not at all. 72% of Seattle's forest is where we live. So it's on single family and multifamily residential homes. Yards are where Seattle's forest is. 11% of Seattle's forest is in parks. It's super substantial, right? But when you think about all of the beautiful parks that we have, and that's only 11% of our canopy, it makes you kind of like realize that you and I, if you're a renter, if you own your home, you and I, we are the managers. And I know I literally am, but I mean Allie, like the Allie who goes home and like has a dog, and we are the managers of the urban forest. We really are. We make decisions every day that impact the trees where we live, where we play, where some of us, maybe where you eat, sometimes the businesses that you frequent. And I think that that's really important to kind of understand, is that we have a lot of, we have a lot of connection and reciprocity, but we also have a lot of responsibility for trees as residents. And this is true, by the way. I worked in South King County a lot, so if you don't, I know most of us are probably from Seattle. I don't know a ton about shoreline, but I'm assuming that they're true as well. This is very true for Fury and Sea-Tac Des Moines. Residents, generally have most of the tree canopy in all of the cities that I've worked with. And the other kind of interesting thing is 72% of our canopy is deciduous, so it means it's not an evergreen tree. It's not going to keep its leaves all winter long. But almost 60% of conifers are on residential single-family and multifamily land. And we'll talk a little bit about why that's important. Conifers, they do keep their leaves year-round, so they're providing benefits in that way year-round. Also, our large conifers they love to soak up water, which is important. Where I work a lot with SPU. I actually work with all departments in the city who touch urban forestry. There are 14 of them. But I work primarily with SPU, and that's kind of where we're housed, is because we are, really thinking about cleaning stormwater, another benefit of the urban forest, and hopefully slowing it down before it gets to our urban creeks and before it gets to the sound. Oh, that one didn't turn out so well, sorry. And then, we can think about, and I'd love to talk if anyone has any questions. There are differences in choices, like if you have a north side that you want to shade in the summer of your house and you want to plant trees, sure, deciduous trees are fantastic, but their leaf complexity can be quite different. Actually, Joey will talk a little bit more about Western red cedar, but I always think of that tree. I don't know if anyone has a personal relationship with Western red cedar. I do. And they have a very interesting and complex needle or leaf. Their sprays have lots of little grooves in them, and that's really helpful to slow down stormwater, a lot of surface area to really literally move through the tree, but also it's fantastic for air filtration. And so if you live under a flight path, some of our conifers, they have that buffer from the flight path year round, and certain trees they're not true cedars, but like our Western red cedar and other cedars, they have this really incredible leaf complexity, and particulates get trapped in their needles, and they actually make the air cleaner. By the way, I'm also a huge fan of deciduous trees, just to be clear, but in general, we're trying to encourage people to plant the right tree for the right place. They get really big. This is anybody know that one? It's coastal redwoods, giant. You probably can't fit it in your yard, it is right tree, right place for sure, but we do encourage people who have the room to plant conifers. And so this is just a cool graphic from King County that I just loved. And it was all the things, right, that are happening that we predict to happen with climate changes. And, for us at Trees for Seattle, we're really focused on that left-hand side in the upper corner, right, looking at increased heat and looking at public health impacts due to heat. So how can we get people shade? How can we get people shade? And so Laura told you about this awesome study. I just want to point out that Anne, who's here, reminded me the other day in a presentation that actually Seattle had a very similar disparity. It was not quite 23 degrees. I think it was closer to just a little less than 20 degrees. But if you were in one neighborhood of Seattle and you lived in another neighborhood of Seattle, your neighborhood might be 20 degrees hotter than another on that afternoon. And so what do we know, though? What we know is that urban heat islands are the inverse, they're the opposite of canopy maps. So the left-hand side is our canopy map, and you can see, I personally, I see Discovery Park, I see Seward Park, and then I see those places lighting up as cooler on the right-hand side. And so we weren't surprised by any of the urban heat information. I think we knew because we have our canopy data, but it just absolutely confirmed it for us. It also gave us priority neighborhoods and areas that we really want to focus on. Of course, we know that these areas have been historically underinvested in. They are communities of color often. This is actually it's not an urban heat map. It looks similar, but that's actually our race and social equity composite index. So this is all sociodemographics on this side over here. And actually, it looks similar, where the dark red are areas where we have people who speak English as a second language or do not speak English, who are socioeconomically disadvantaged. Sorry, these are hard to read. And then as well, health disadvantaged. And so they look very similar to urban heat mapping. But the other thing I think is interesting, and this is gonna push this over to Joey, there's also an interesting thing here where we have high heat neighborhoods that have socioeconomic disadvantages that also have an abundance of street trees susceptible to pests of concern. So these are pests that we expect to see in Seattle because of climate change. So all of these things point to certain areas of the city where our team needs to be doing, reparative work and really to be investing, sometimes for the first time in some ways, in some of the canopy in these neighborhoods. And so, looking at Lake City, Pinehurst, looking at South Park, Georgetown, sometimes the CD, all of these areas. But this is also a map that we've been trying to make some decisions on as well. Like, where do we think we're going to lose trees? And I'm going to skip this one because I think we know some of the reasons that we've gotten here. Thank you to Laura. I also just want to point out, like, compaction, like the soil not being healthy. I want to point out the fact that we're looking at trees that are living in areas where it's hotter. They're also experiencing heat impacts, right? It's not just us that are having a hard time with heat dome. And so some of you might have planted some trees this year who didn't make it through heat dome. But we definitely saw that in our program. And we saw that in certain places, these high heat areas, more than other places in Seattle. More trees, it's cooler. That's what the left-hand side says. And then, less impervious surface and a 40% canopy in neighborhoods. This is like globally kind of thought of as the greatest potential for climate mitigation and for urban residents. Like, that is kind of a global goal. It's not our city's goal, I'll be really honest, but it's just an interesting, I can tell you where this came from, but anyway, there we are. So these are ways to keep areas where people live coolest. I think we're going to have a question about this later, but I just want to point out that when we talk about what we're planting, we're thinking about where we're planting. Your yard is not a native environment. It doesn't fit like a forest, so we do want to think about that. There are often places where it doesn't make sense to put a vine maple, even though it's a beautiful native species. I want to always ask people why they are planting that tree. Is it a cultural connection? Is it something that they remember from their childhood? Do they want food? What is it that they want that tree to do and be for them? What kind of relationship do they want to have? I always want to ask people, when are you planting for? There are a few of us scientists, I don't know if anyone else is in here today, but who work on a group called the Forest Adaptation Network, and we've been talking about how we're going to deal with native trees and where we're selecting seed and making sure that we are planting 100, 150, 200 years in the future. And there are a lot of feelings about that, and it's a little bit challenging because the science cannot keep up with how quickly this climate is changing. And so there's a lot of trials that are happening kind of in real time, and it's more of a management than often it's research. And I don't know if Joey will address that at all, but it's kind of interesting. I do encourage people to please avoid invasive trees. I'd be happy to tell you what some of those are, but you could also just check out King County's website. We have a great program. And then also reminding people that sometimes, we hear a lot about native trees. I personally love them. I have a lot in my yard. And also, non-native species can tolerate tough urban environments, like a street tree that's parked, that's literally in like a parking strip. And then also, you can often find a tree that fits into small spaces. And so, there are oftentimes people who have patios that they want a tree for, or, other places. And so we do often encourage people to, to think broadly when they're looking for a tree. And then finally, I just wanted to kind of end with that tree health in Seattle is honestly relatively understudied. Certain departments, we are studying the tree health, including our street trees, but 72% of canopy is just in our yards. And so we don't have a lot of data about private trees. We don't know if they're healthy, if they're not healthy. And so I think Joey's gonna talk to us about that. But I also want to just mention that the Green Seattle Partnership is here. They run, I'm sure there are some forest stewards here. Anybody want to shout out their forest steward? Oh, I love to hear it. All right, so there are people who are out there all the time. They're caring for trees in our forested parks and our natural areas. I run tree care events as well, so keep an eye out for Trees for Seattle. And then don't forget to care for the trees where you live. And so that might be like a kind word. It might just be like getting to know what the heck that thing is that you live with. Maybe you could water it when it's hot outside. Maybe you could go get some mulch and put a ring around it. I'll teach you how to do it if you want to know. It's on the website. And then you can just go from there, right? Like then you can start getting really excited about trees and maybe starting to learn some pruning and other things. But caring for trees where you live is part of the help as well. If you have questions, it's seattle.gov/trees. There's lots of information. Also, this is how you can contact me. So thank you all.
Thank you so much, Ellie. That was fantastic. We learned a lot about trees in Seattle. So, and that's actually a great transition. The last thing that Ellie was talking about was, of course, what we know about trees, scientific research on trees in our area, the health of our trees in our area. And so that's a fantastic transition to the last speaker in our series, Dr. Joey Hulbert. He's a U.S. Department of Agriculture NIFA postdoctoral research fellow based at the Washington State University Research and Extension Center in Puyallup, Washington. He's also the director of the Forest Healthwatch program, where he draws on his extensive experience leading the Cape Citizen Science program during his doctoral degree at the University of Pretoria in South Africa. Through this experience, his background in forest health, and his passion for public engagement in science, Dr. Hulbert engages communities in research about the consequences of climate change on the health of forests. He is eager. I appreciate that. He's eager to cultivate more partnerships and give back to communities. So feel free to contact him to collaborate or organize a forest health presentation for your community. Before I turn it over to him, I do want to just make one more plug. If you have questions for any of our speakers, go to Slido. You can either type in the code 568403, or you can scan the QR code to ask your questions of our speakers.
Or you could just do it the old-fashioned way.
Yeah. And so without further ado, I do want to turn it over to Dr. Joey Hulbert. Let's go ahead and give it up for Dr. Joey Hulbert.
All right, thank you. It has always been my dream to be at an event like this. If we combine science and beer, then you all are exactly the people I want to speak to, and I want to know all of you. So please reach out to me, come and talk to me. I'd love to understand your perspectives, and your perspectives are really important. So I can't thank the previous speakers enough. Thank you, Ali and Laura. Set us up really well. We're talking about some actions that you can do to help our urban forests in Seattle and beyond. I do want to start by acknowledging that we are really privileged right now to be here on Coast Salish people's lands. And we acknowledge that we're here on stolen land from many different communities. And I encourage you to check out nativeland.ca to see all the different native peoples and all the communities that have occupied this part of Seattle in the past. But yeah, I just want to acknowledge that we are really privileged to get to learn and explore and study in this area. As Ali said, she moved here from the south because of what we have, and we're just really lucky to have it. I'm going to introduce our program because I really think it's important that you all know we exist and that we're there as a resource to you all. So I'm going to spend a couple minutes talking about our program at WSU in Puyallup, and then I'm going to talk about some of the factors that are affecting the health of trees in our urban community, and then we'll talk about some actual local concerns we have before I introduce the Forest Healthwatch program and how you all can get involved in helping keep our forests healthy. I do want to acknowledge, as Sean mentioned, I am here today because I'm supported by tax money, tax dollars. Thank you all very much for contributing to the USDA. They've given me a fellowship so that I can be here with you all and lead this really cool work. So thank you. If you aren't aware, there's a research and extension center that's part of Washington State University just east of Tacoma. And so I spend a lot of my time working and learning on the traditional homelands of the Puyallup tribe of Indians, actually. But today I'm here with you in the beautiful Seattle Ballard area. This is a lot of my mentors in Puyallup, and I just wanted to introduce them because we're really team forest health, if you will. So all these people have expertise in keeping trees healthy, and we're totally there as a resource to you all. We study things like the diseases that are spread with the ornamental plants that you may purchase or buy or plant. We study things like how do we keep madrones healthy. You may have seen madrone blight and some of the diseases that affect madrone. We're interested in studying, can we use genetic diversity as a tool to combat things like that, and how can we use genetic diversity as a tool to adapt to future climates. And so we have a common garden with madrones. We're also studying a disease on maples now called sooty bark disease, and I'm going to introduce that a little bit more. But I really welcome you all to reach out to us if we could be of any help or answer any questions about the trees in your yard or the trees in your communities. I will say that if you love Pacific madrone, or if you love Arbutus menziesii, or maybe you call it madrona, maybe you call it arbutus. If you love Pacific madrone like we do, and there's some phenomenal berry crop out right now, but I encourage you to study or to join this Arbutus Army. So it's another community group with all things interesting about Pacific madrone. And so we call it Army for the shorthand of Arbutus menziesii. But in all things, again, just emphasizing that we're here as a resource, and you're welcome to contact me. I'll share my details at the end. So I'm just briefly going to talk about the factors that affect tree health. And you can conceptualize this pretty simply with a triangle. Sometimes we refer to this as the disease triangle, but in some cases we might be talking about insect pests that may be infecting or infesting a tree, if you will, rather than a disease. So there's three components of this. There's the introduction of a pest or pathogen, there's the host, so in this case a tree, and there's the environment. And all three of these things have to interact in a certain way to create this disease or this unhealthy tree. So first let's talk about some pest or pathogens. In Seattle, we are uniquely challenged because we are a major port of entry. We have lots of different pathways that a new organism can arrive in Seattle. And one of them is our major port. And so we are constantly concerned and looking out for many insect pests and the arrival of other stuff that we don't even know. So if you see something that concerns you, we encourage you to let us know so we can investigate it. Emerald ash borer is a great example of an invasive insect that hasn't moved further west in Colorado yet, but we anticipate it will arrive, and we know Oregon ash, our local ash, is susceptible to it. So we are quite concerned. Keep your eye out. Spotted lanternfly is another example of a pest that can affect the tree health. Another one that the Washington State Invasive Species Council is readily out there looking for. If you see this really charismatic insect, please report it. Longhorn beetles, there's numerous longhorn beetles that we're concerned with, but again, these are just examples of pests that we are interested in and that we are concerned with. So I'm really just trying to emphasize that we are under threat. Our urban forest is always under threat from pests and pathogens. In addition to that, we are also planting trees like crazy, which is great. Which is really great, but are we planting trees in the right place, in the right time? As Ali has said, the right tree, right place is really important. And so what we're faced with is how do we balance more trees, and how do we use the knowledge we have, but also how do we predict what's going to happen with future climates and what trees are going to be the best in those situations. Finally, we know that the environment is constantly in flux, and we're seeing some pretty unprecedented changes. And so together, what we have is a pretty messy mix of things that can lead to a tree becoming unhealthy. So we have more trade, we have the port of entry locally, we have more hosts being planted all the time, could be potentially stressed hosts if we plant them in the wrong place. And we have more climate change, or more changing climates to deal with. And all of this just equals more uncertainty, more issues, more problems. We need more support, we need more help, we need more people like you looking out for the health of our forests and keeping an eye on what's going on. So I'm going to highlight a couple issues that we're seeing or we're hearing about. We don't really have the answers. I encourage you to engage with me around this, ask questions about this. Our primary concern right now is Western red cedar dieback, and I'll talk about this a little more. This is our primary concern because we know how important Western red cedar is as a cultural resource. So throughout King County, throughout really from Central Oregon all the way to Central British Columbia, we're seeing this event where we see the top dieback of Western red cedar. And we're really concerned because we know that red cedar is really important. We chose this as the first project and the focus of the Forest Healthwatch because of the extreme cultural importance of Western red cedar. And this is really well illustrated with all these images from the Washington Historical Society, where you can see Western red cedar has been used for transport and shelter and textiles and clothing and all kinds of incredible art, carving, some really just fascinating and important uses. It's considered a really generous species for all the gifts that it's given to indigenous cultures since time immemorial, and it's really important that we try and keep it on the landscape for future generations. In addition to that, Ali talked a lot about the urban forests in Seattle. Western red cedar composes 1,600 different trees on our streets in Seattle alone. So it's really important in terms of the footprint and the impact and what it's providing to us in Seattle locally. We're also concerned, we're seeing heightened levels of red alder dieback. We're also really concerned with big leaf maple, and we've been scratching our heads about this for a long time. Recently, out of University of Washington, there was a study that linked it with longer and hotter droughts. So we have some resolution and some understanding of what's going on there. But we also recently have seen the emergence of a fungus that causes a disease called sooty bark disease. And so this was highlighted in the Seattle Times recently. There's a really great article on the Washington DNR newsletter. But generally, we're quite concerned with this disease. It seems to be emerging more as trees experience the drought or the heat events, like Ali had mentioned. So this is kind of what we see. It's characterized by this sooty fungal characteristic after the bark has shed, or essentially you see the bark flake off, and underneath you'll see these black sooty patches, and that's kind of the characteristics that we look for with sooty bark disease. So if you do see this, we want to know about it, and I'll show you how you can share that with us. Another concern is the western hemlock, and this is our state tree, and it's kind of tragic when we think about what's happening with western hemlock. But again, this is an example of something we really don't have a good understanding of what's happening, why is this going on, and where is it happening. So in summary, there's a lot of different issues that we're concerned with that are affecting our trees and our urban environment, but we need more research and more community scientists, if you will, and more support for research to really understand what's going on. So this is kind of where the objective of the Forest Healthwatch comes in. Well, there's a lot of issues Ali mentioned, which is incredible to hear from our standpoint. You know, we don't have a good understanding of how healthy our trees are in our urban environment. And so the Forest Healthwatch, the premise is to empower people to look for and understand what's happening to their trees, and also advance knowledge, but create shared understanding as well. And so there's a few different ways to engage with us. You can sign up as a community scientist if you'd like to be in better touch with us. It's not at all required. We also have office hours, virtual office hours every month. If you want to come and just ask questions, there's a time and a place that we're there, and you're always welcome to come and ask any question you want. We also have office hours for tribal members, and we have office hours for how to use iNaturalist and some specific topics like that. And then finally, we have, every month we do a research update. So if you want to hear what the community science data is showing and how we intend to use that, then these monthly updates are a really great opportunity to get that transparency and see what we're learning. So there's a lot of different ways to get involved with the Forest Healthwatch. Now I'm going to just share specifically how you can go away today and really help our urban forests. We've created numerous projects on a smartphone application called iNaturalist. You don't have to use your smartphone, you can just use your computer if you prefer, but it's a really incredible platform that's open and free and there's no ads or anything like that, so check it out. We chose it because already 4 million people are using it and they've already shared more than 65 million observations. So you can go on there and look at all the different organisms that have been shared in your neighborhood. It's a really cool tool and it's really just built to accelerate science. The way it generally works is you share an observation, you take a picture of any organism and you share it out and the community helps you identify what that organism is. So you can use it as an identification tool, or you can share it with a specific project, like what we were asking. So as part of the Forest Healthwatch, we have a bunch of different projects that you can engage with. Our primary interest right now is the red cedar dieback. So we've created a project to record where healthy and unhealthy red cedar trees are, and I'll get to that a little bit more. But we have a few different projects. One, there's a project that we recently created where if you think you saw sooty bark disease on a maple tree, you can share pictures on there and we'll be able to interact with you there. You're also welcome to just email me if you prefer. So again, coming back to Western Red Cedar and the priority project that we're asking for your help today, we created this project with help from the state and federal agencies. So there's scientists here in Washington that are interested in tracking this, and we work with them to extend that tracking capacity out to the public. And so today we're sitting at a little more than 1,200 observations, and what's really incredible is that we have an understanding of whether each of these trees is healthy or unhealthy. So right now, if you went on iNaturalist and you search red cedar, you would find there's 13,000 red cedars shared on iNaturalist. However, we have no idea if it's a healthy red cedar or an unhealthy red cedar. And so that's why we ask you to specifically work with this project where you can answer a question about their health. If you're interested, you can see some preliminary analyses and play with the data and visualize it in a different way by going to foresthealth.org/analyses. We're really grateful that we had a volunteer help us make this so that it updates every single day and you can go and interact and look in your neighborhood and see where red cedars have been shared. Going back to why this is important and how this will help. So if we talk about all these different points that have been shared where we know that tree is healthy or that tree is unhealthy, now we can pull the GPS point from there and get a lot more information. So just from knowing if the tree's healthy and knowing where it is, we can pull in information like what is the average temperature of that location for the past 30 years? What is the amount of rainfall that it's received this year? And so we can pull out some really neat climate data. We can also pull out some really cool topographic data, like where on the landscape is it? What direction is it facing? How much heat do you expect it to get in a given day? And then finally, we can also pull in what soils are there, what soil type is maybe influencing the health of that tree. And so really just from sharing a photo of a red cedar and a GPS point of where that photo is taken and telling us if it's a healthy or unhealthy tree, we can really accelerate research and understanding about what are the factors affecting Western red cedar dieback and where should we plant red cedar in the future or where should we not plant red cedar in the future. I do want to emphasize that it's just as important to tell us where healthy trees are as it is to tell us where unhealthy trees are. And the last few slides I have are to talk about a couple specific hypothesis tests that we invite you to participate in. So if you go to our website, you'll find a little bar where you find hypothesis tests. And so we have two that I'm going to share with you today. And this is building off the previous presentations, which is incredible. I'm just so grateful that I get to be a part of this. But let's say we hypothesize that red cedar trees will be less healthy in areas with hotter surface temperatures. And fortunately, because of King County, we have that information and that data. We know where hot areas are, and we know where cooler areas are. And so we've taken these maps, and then we've asked cities, 8 different cities in this area in King County, to provide street tree data. And with that, we were able to pick out randomly some red cedar trees from these cities at different temperatures. And so now the quest is, will you join us to go to these target trees on our streets and use iNaturalist to document if it's healthy or not? And together we can test this hypothesis to understand how is heat affecting our trees. So to learn more about that, you can go to foresthealth.org/redhot. And we also have another hypothesis related to redlining and the historical practices in the city, where again, we hypothesize that trees in redlined areas will be less healthy than trees in non-redlined areas. And this is primarily because we know they're hotter, right? But you can help test this question. What does it mean if a tree is healthier in your neighborhood than a redlined area? Is it a symbol? Does the health of that red cedar mean anything? If there's an unhealthy red cedar in your neighborhood, does that mean anything? So we're really interested in exploring how red cedar can be a symbol for the inequities in our environment, in our communities, but also, how can we better, where are the areas that need more support in terms of tree health? So I encourage you to go to foresthealth.org/Seattle. You can just open this link with your smartphone, and it'll open in Google Maps if you have Google, and you can navigate directly to the tree, and then you can share it on iNaturalist. It's pretty simple. And because of some really incredible donations from the Seattle Aquarium right now, whoever visits the most of these trees in November gets these 4 tickets, thanks to the Seattle Aquarium. And right now, there's only 6 trees that have been visited, so you really just have to add more than 2. So please, I encourage you. We need to get rid of these tickets. We're really grateful to have support and community partners like that. But in the end, really this is a cool way that we can all work together to advance knowledge about tree health in our community. And it's a great way that we can all learn together and create this shared understanding about the factors affecting our trees and how we can keep trees healthy. So my email is holby@wsu.edu. You can also engage with me at the foresthealth.org webpage. And please don't leave tonight without taking some stickers from our project. We put some in the CTA. And I do want to invite, if you have feedback outside of this and you'd like to share your perspective or your thoughts on this presentation or our efforts at the Forest Healthwatch, please, I invite you to share anonymously on foresthealth.org. The last thing I'll say is just extreme thank you to Marion and Sean for hosting us and the CCA volunteers. This is really incredible, and I'm thrilled that you're all here with us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Joe. That was great. Lots of great opportunities for folks to get involved, and I really do appreciate that. So now is the fun part. Well, this was all fun, but now the extreme fun part is your opportunity to ask questions of our panelists. So I'm going to invite our panelists to come up front and take some seats in the hot seats up here. I would encourage you once again to write your questions down on those note cards. Volunteers are circulating around, they'll wave their hands in the air, and you can go ahead and they'll take your cards, or you can go to Slido, type in the code, that's 568403, or you can scan that QR code and you can go ahead and submit your questions. We'll be taking those questions up front. Actually, Jenny, would you like to come over here? That's my seat, Joey. My seat. So, like I said, if you have questions for our panelists, I would strongly encourage you to get those to our volunteers or to submit them online. I'm going to go ahead and just start with the questions we've received so far. And so the first one that I wanted to mention, or the first one I wanted to bring up, was a question for, this one's a question for Laura. Laura, so you mentioned the idea of sort of comprehensive planning for dealing with climate impacts, specifically heat impacts. And I'm just wondering, in terms of the county's prioritization on how we deal with these things, we talked a little bit about urban greening, but is there a sort of a priority, sort of a hierarchy of things that the county is doing right now to deal with heat impacts?
So I think the Public Health Seattle King County has done an amazing job of developing outreach materials that are in language that really help different communities understand what their options are for managing heat when it happens. So I think that we are building from a good foundation of emergency management measures, but with climate change, we don't want to rely on emergency management measures as our way of responding. So it's not about leaving those behind, but rather looking at how can we continue to build on those, but then how can we also strategically kind of continue to look at some of the other types of things that we should be doing, both in the near term, in the immediate term, and the longer term, to adapt that built environment and our systems to be able to handle the heat. So, we haven't prioritized these things to say this one's more important than that one. I think as we develop this strategy, we'll have some conversations around which actions are certainly the ones we want to move on sooner. Those may be actions like tree planting, which take time for those trees to reach the maturity and to start providing the shade benefits. So let's get going on that, or let's keep moving and investing on that and accelerating and amplifying that. But then there are other things that we're going to be doing in the meantime while Allie's planting all these trees and making sure that they're healthy and happy.
Yeah, no, that's great. Actually, as you mentioned, Allie's making sure the trees are healthy and happy. And I guess the next question I had, was one I saw here, was what is the city of Seattle, what is Trees for Seattle doing to sort of be thinking forward into the future, what we might expect from climate change, and using that information in making decisions about tree planting right now?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think right now in our program, we are applying for additional funding for, targeting communities that have low canopy and making sure that our Trees for Neighborhoods program is working in language and really reducing barriers to tree care and to tree planting. And I think that we need to acknowledge that it costs money to water a tree. It costs kind of a lot of money to water it for the first 5 years. A lot of times it isn't inexpensive. Mulch costs money, all these pieces, and then they also cost time. And time we know to be quite expensive. And so I think that there are some ways that we are trying to look at our programs and say, who's doing this well? I'm actually having a conversation with the city of Atlanta later this month, looking at other cities and saying, all right, what are your programs? How are you addressing this when it comes to caring for trees on private land for people who maybe they have access issues, like physical access issues, they have different abilities. Maybe they have financial access issues. And so those are some of the places I think we're trying to be innovative. Seattle often prides itself on being an innovative city, and so I hope that we can really do that work. We've got a lot of action, I think, sometimes to live into that title, but I do hope that we can make those, make some of those actions that help people care for trees in the long term. And then also we're working with scientists to really help select trees that make sense, and that's a hard one. As someone personally, I came from the restoration world. I worked a lot with only native plants. That's kind of what I know, and so it's been a transition for me to work more with horticultural horticultural varieties and working more with some of our ornamentals and some trees from around the world. But I think we also need to think about where we're getting tree seeds and sourcing them from further south, and things like that. So we're trying to kind of keep in mind all of those things. And I just want to acknowledge that a lot of what I do is planning and communication. And so, hopefully as well, we do have city staff that meet quite often, actually, just to talk about urban forestry. We have a great core team. I really appreciate all those people that I get to work with. I think that, engagement and getting people like you all to speak to elected officials and doing that work and thinking collaboratively long term, like our solutions are going to come from each other as well. And so just listening to our community.
Great, thank you very much for that, Allie. So next question, I want to go ahead and give one to Joey as well. So one of the things we think about when we think about like community science or citizen science projects is sort of one sort of reoccurring issue is how do we create opportunities for participation among diverse groups of people? And I'm just wondering if Forest Healthwatch is thinking about that as opportunities for folks within diverse communities to get involved.
Absolutely, yeah. I think that's actually a pretty honest challenge that we're faced with is we're doing this research to help communities, frontline communities that are feeling the heat literally more than others, but are we doing a good job engaging those communities? And to be honest, I would say there's a lot of opportunity to do better. We need to do a lot better in that regard. But that's essentially the whole reason we want to do this as a community science project. We could be out there collecting the information on our own and publishing a paper to say, trees are less healthy in urban areas. But who learns from that? And that's kind of the whole premise of why we want to engage communities in this research as well. But yeah, can we do a better job engaging those frontline communities? Absolutely. And if I had if I had advice for how you do that, I'd love to share it, but I'm still learning, I guess. And I would welcome any of you that have perspectives or input or insight on how to do that, or relationships that you think would be interested, or as Sean introduced at the beginning, I'm always looking for more community partners and things like that. So if there's a way that we can work together to really, really make this accessible in the communities that we're trying to help, then I'm all ears. Thank you.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much for that, Joey. Well, a common theme among some of the questions that we've received from the audience is sort of the push and pull when it comes to sort of tree canopy issues and building, and sort of the idea of one question, I think the most popular question here is, how can we drive discussions and municipal actions regarding canopy cover and equity when the dominant narrative sets up a false dichotomy between having trees and equitable housing, and of course, increased density. So, anybody have any thoughts about that?
Okay. I just want to acknowledge that, it is a false dichotomy. There isn't a choice that you have to make that's either affordable housing or trees. There are studies, there are incredible people speaking on this. I don't need to be the person speaking on this. Vivek Shandas is someone who helped us with our urban heat study, and I've seen incredible plans that he is not an architect, but has a wealth of information available. And Laura was talking about Renton. There are places that are doing this. We can do this well. It is possible, and it's just not currently happening. And so I think that that's something here all the time. And so we need to conversations like this. I think awareness is hugely important. And then I think looking and listening to there are many places that are tackling this. I mean, we also want to talk about. I also want to talk about, and this is actually the call I'm having with Atlanta, is how do you add canopy and not displace people, right? Because we know that also adds value to home sites. And so, right now there are solutions that are being tried, There are cities we can look to. There's like a global network of people doing this work. And so I think that when we look for solutions and we're willing to do things, again, live into our innovative name, I think there are ways that we can do that work. I'll let you, you had some good examples though, I think. Do you want to share a little bit more about the Renton spot?
I guess I mentioned that Willow Crest, it's an affordable housing development down in Renton, and it's currently under construction. I think it's almost done. So there's some good information available, but what's neat about that project is that it's designed almost like a campus. So it's the affordable housing, but as I mentioned, it's also the green space and the trees. And I think it's just this question of we can have trees, we can have affordable housing, we can have density. It's just a matter of how the choices that we make. This is a solvable problem, right? We just have to do it.
I also just want to acknowledge, like, as a white person and as a person who feels like pretty comfortable in my city job, like, it also is a redistribution of resources, and we need to look carefully at where we are diverting resources. And I think that that's something that, I see happening a lot in my program, and so I hope that can continue, and really making sure that we are putting resources where they're needed the most.
Thank you. Yeah, I also want to just add to this that I like to think of urban forests as an experiment. We live just in a giant experiment, and so we got to try things, and we got to see what works in the near future, and then plan for a greater future. But we got to try things, and the more important part of that is we got to record and share out what we're doing and what works and what doesn't work. And we need to. That's where community science is really powerful. Is that we could design an experiment and look at, what trees are best suited for high density. What trees? The city has some of this data, but that's what we're here as a researcher. I would love to work with. I'm clearly working with Ali and Laura, but I would love to work more with you all to design tests like that and do experiments and really try and advance knowledge in the urban forest that we live in, the big experiment that we all are experiencing every day.
Yeah, thank you each for that. So another common theme here has to do with single-family zoning, and the fact that, as you say, Ali, a lot of these trees are on private property. They're in the yards of single-family homes. I'm just kind of curious what the city of Seattle is doing to work with homeowners to maintain that tree canopy on private property. What is the process, knowing, of course, the importance of it, not just to the homeowner, but also to the broader community?
Yeah, and I know that I've seen a few tips of the hat in my direction already tonight on this, so I will acknowledge that I don't work for SCCI, and I'm not working on our policy. So I know some of you do know that there is policy that's been in development, and there's a lot to say about some of the workings of that, and I'll have to be honest with you that we can have a conversation, and I have information about that to some degree, but I don't really have much information more than any of you. So a lot of you are really well researched in that, and I just will let that be. But I want to acknowledge that something that is really dear to my heart, and is how do we help homeowners that have trees and there's ivy crawling up the tree and suffocating it, and they don't have the physical ability to go and remove it. We have programs in the city that adopt streets. We have programs in the city that adopt drains. And so, there's some pieces there that I think that we could work collaboratively. Like, are there people in your neighborhood who need some support? Like, sure, I'm thinking about designing a volunteer program around that, but if, it takes me a little while. If any of you want to, start that work yourselves, that would be awesome. But I think that some of the questions that I have is like, how can we help each other? How can we come together to do some of that support? And I think that also, if we do it in these hyper-local communities, then we can work with community organizations, aka partner with them, aka provide them funding to help organize these kind of events where people actually receive support in their yard. Some of you know about the Rainwise program. We have an actual yard care program, by the way, through SPU. So some of these things are happening, and we just haven't transitioned it yet to trees. And so that's something that we're working on right now. Is like, how can we do this? How can we do this? How can we do this legally with all sorts of rules about private property? How can we do it in a way that's safe and healthy? And then how can we do it in a way that's equitable? And so it's a great question, and something that we, that was like my last slide, which is like preserving canopy, large canopy that exists is, that is mitigating climate. And so like that should be our focus, and then how we move out from there as well. And so of course tree planting is fantastic, but also preserving canopy is really important. And honestly, tree health and keeping trees healthy is kind of the start to that. And also I just want to acknowledge that there are times when we are too late. Like I don't know, like some of you know about birches and what's going on with them. And so then also how can we have programs within the city where we're thinking creatively and like, all right, we're gonna have to have replacements for people when their birch tree dies. And we wanted to have some of the same ecosystem services and mental health benefits and all the things that their previous tree has. Sorry that was bad news for you and you didn't know about Birch Dieback, but look at the crown of the tree on like any birch that you see in the city, and most of them have fallen prey to some birch borer, which is an insect. So just trying to think innovatively and also prepare for some of these pests that are likely to change the canopy of this grand experiment, like Jody said.
Thank you for that, Allie. Joe, you mentioned, you rightfully sort of provided a land acknowledgement during your presentation, thinking about the land that we're on and thinking about sort of the peoples that have been here for time immemorial, stewarding the land. I'm wondering if any of you in your work are working with tribes and tribal governments, tribal people in collaborative ways to think about traditional knowledge or ecological knowledge that could be incorporated into some of this stewardship of these trees, especially native trees. Anyone want to speak to that?
Yeah, it's a good question, and it's something that it's something we are doing. We, working with Red Cedar has been a really another reason I'm really like a humbling way to recognize how privileged I am, but just to have the honor to connect with someone around a certain tree that's so important has been a really neat bridge to build relationships, and we're really grateful that we have this focus on Red Cedar, and we've been fortunate to learn a lot from tribal community members, and I feel like Red Cedar has kind of changed me in a really good way because I've learned so much just working with this species. And so the short answer is yeah, we have some growing relationships with tribal members and tribal communities, but every day I think about how I should be sending another email or reaching out to another. We're really privileged in the Northwest that there's so many different communities, and there's a lot of different tribes that I should be speaking to about this issue, and so there's clearly a lot more work to be done. And but yeah, in terms of how Indigenous knowledge could be useful or improve the work that we're doing, especially, just knowing whether there's been an event in the past similarly where we saw a lot of dieback of red cedar would be really valuable, and we don't have that knowledge yet unless we reach out to these tribal elders and we talk about these tribal stories and this Indigenous knowledge. And that, accessing that knowledge, you have to earn it. And I'm not sure I've earned it. And so that's where I am right now. I feel like I got a lot of learning to do, so.
Yeah, I want to say that, kind of Allie, the human who's not Jewish for Seattle, Allie, has benefited from many kind of deep and incredibly meaningful and mind-changing relationships with Native tribes and Native people and books and Robin Wall Hemmerer. I'm sure some of you are familiar with Dr. Hemmerer's work. and getting to have conversation. I get to have a conversation with her before, and I feel like I've benefited quite a bit. And so I want to acknowledge that this land has been, like Joey said, been cared for. Like, we're just continuing a legacy of care. And you are. And whenever you care for land, whenever you plant food, whenever you eat even old Himalayan blackberry, but some of our native berries, like, we are continuing a legacy of relationship and reciprocity with plants. And so absolutely, Trees for Seattle, we have been making some conversations and connections with specifically the Duwamish peoples. I lived actually not super far from Heron's Nest and the Longhouse, and have spent some time there. I've worked as well in the Pacific Lowland Bog, and so worked a lot with the Muckleshoot and other tribes. But I just want to say, like, for me, when I answer this question, I just want to follow. I want to follow there are, well-trod footsteps that I'm following in, and so I hope that I can continue to do that. And there's some friends in this crowd who can hold me accountable to that as a human, but also just really, I actually am a scientist who is a lot of woo-woo, and I have a really great relationship with Western Red Cedar personally. I love that plant so much, and it's always incredible when I get those chances to meet other people who have that understanding of those personal relationships with the land and with plants. And so I just really want to acknowledge that frame came from me, from my relationships with some of, and cats. There's a cat up here if you don't know, it's really adorable. From some of my relationships with tribal members.
I'll just note the county is a huge organization. The county itself is huge. I mean, it's 2,200 square miles, covers a rich diversity of ecosystems, and we as a county government are involved in many aspects of helping to restore that, whether we're talking about forests, salmon, nearshore habitat, any variety of other things. We're dealing with invasive species, and all the way we're working with tribes either through formal consultation or with technical staff. And so it's a complex answer to that question, in terms of how we're working with them in our 3 Million Trees initiative, for example, or some of the other work. Probably a question that's best directed to staff working on that. But it is something that's ever present in all of our work, and relationships that we're always working to maintain with the respect that those relationships deserve.
Interesting. Thank you very much for that. Well, we have one question. This is maybe the last question that I'll throw out here, because I think it's great when we're called out in the Q&A, but given all the talk of equity, why is the panel and moderator all white? So I know why I'm white, but I want to know what each one of our, from your perspective, as someone who works with the county, someone who works with the city, someone who works in research and with the university, how do we center these other voices, the voices of people who are truly impacted by these issues, these equity issues? What are your organizations doing to try and center these voices?
I think, like, for this kind of event, we don't have it in Ballard. We would have it in White Center in South King County, so those communities don't have to drive a long way to participate. So as part of our strategic climate action plan, I had an amazing colleague, Jamie Strobel, who worked with frontline communities through the Climate Equity Community Task Force, and those 22 amazing organizations developed an entire section of our strategic climate action plan on sustainable and resilient frontline communities. And we are continuing to work with that task force and continuing to do everything that we can to ensure that equity is embedded in our climate work, and that equity is also, frankly, just embedded in all the work of the county. And the county's got a big focus on that. That's not just us, but it is something that we have to work on. We have to, both in terms of the system within which we work, but also with ourselves as individuals and with our communities, so that we can do that work better. But I think to have, we talked about this, and just, you know, just so you all know, in our planning for this, we did raise this issue, and we talked about it very briefly by email, like, hey, it's an all-white panel, right, you know, and I think acknowledging the equity implications of our work, I mean, that's an issue that's never been talked about, that wasn't talked about before. Now we're talking about it, but we also need to be looking at who's talking about it and who's speaking to these issues. And so, we need to get those voices here. We need to pay for those voices to be here. It's their time. It's their lived experience. They need to be compensated for that because this is not their full-time job. And we need to go to where those communities are.
I just want to acknowledge that there is, you know, there's gatekeeping that exists in the environmental movement, and I just, you know, in my personal position, I'm a certified arborist. It takes 3 years of training. You get paid through that. You can get paid, yes, jobs do count, but you have to take 3 years of training to just sit for the arborist exam. And, you know, certified arborists are always asking, like, oh, well, what's our problem? It's like, well, to get to this place takes so much privilege to be able to take jobs getting paid not a livable wage. And it takes a lot of perseverance. It takes a lot of things. We know that is there, like the character is there. It's the privilege that it takes to be able to sit for that test. Which, by the way, my job requires, and you know, I don't know that it shouldn't require it. It's just like that is what it is right now. I also want to acknowledge that, you know, we at Seattle and at Trees for Seattle, we're working with a lot of job training programs because restoration is very white and urban forestry is very white, and so we need to find ways to hire, like Laura said, pay people to get training into these places, and we also need to make places safe so that people feel like they can be there. And so it takes a lot of work for white people especially to train themselves, to educate themselves, to look deeply on how we can make places safe for people of color to feel like they can be in that job and they can envision themselves there. I think that's really, really important as well. And you know, I think the other piece of that is I've gotten to hire people, and like we are in a place where it is changing, and you know, we're like this is where we are right now, is that a lot of these qualifications that are required for certain positions aren't met by people that we would like to be in the positions. I think is the best way I could say that. That there's not a lot of diversity. And I think that's changing, but I also want to acknowledge, like, and sorry to call it toxic academia, but like, we need to make spaces safe so that people can do a job, work their 40 hours, and go home and be okay, or be a graduate student and feel safe, and like, not be incredibly like overworked. And you know, there's just a lot of work we can do to really like dismantle toxic white culture so that people feel like this is a place that they can be represented. And then also, of course, here I am talking on a mic, and so we can give up our mics and give them to other people as white people.
Yeah, thanks to whoever asked this question. I think it's a really good, real discussion that we should all be having more often and all the time. And I'm honored that I get to stand up here with a microphone and share my thoughts on it. I'm clearly not the right person to ask this question to, or to answer on how we increase diversity in our system. Again, just echoing that our voices are the wrong voices in a lot of cases. And for me, when I think of how do we be more inclusive, there's two approaches. One is removing barriers, and as like Laura mentioned, you know, compensating people for their time. Not asking the one person of color in your community to chair the equity committee and being the voice for equity, because it's a burden in itself. But the other approach is relationships. For me, I just have realized that if I want to be inclusive, it's not about just opening my door and having a community office hours for tribal members. no one comes to those unless they have a relationship with me. And I have to go out that door and make those relationships. And that's really my challenge. And that's what I challenge you all to do. And that's something that we should all be doing better if we want to really make impacts in our communities.
Can I say just one thing? And this is something I usually have a slide on, and I apologize I didn't put it in there, but Google exit polling and Google what communities, especially we're talking about race, what communities are most concerned with climate change. And I want to say there's also work that we as white people can do to talk to other white people, because that is, we look at people of color specifically, they're usually calling out Hispanic, Latinx, identified people, and then black people, and then white people, and actually white people often score the lowest on being concerned about climate change, in this country. So, hey, I'm just calling out myself, but there's work that we can do, talking to our parents, talking to our neighbors, talking to each other. So I think there's also some work that we as white people can do to, address climate specifically and climate concerns with each other.
Thank you for that. So this is the last question, because I know we're running out of time. This is a really important one. Joey, I'll give it to you first. What kind of tree are you?
That is a difficult question. I've been asked similar questions like what trees are favorite, and that's a little easier. I used to think Madrona was my favorite, but now I love Birch Cedar. The more I learn about it, the more I love it. But you should ask my partner what tree I am.
It sounds like a little relationship test, actually.
Maybe like a ponderosa pine or something.
All right.
Very thick-headed, if you will.
All right. How about you?
I'm going to go with Cascara, because I just really love wetlands. So if you don't know about Cascara, look it up. It's a great native tree. It's beautiful. I'm just going with that.
I honestly have absolutely no idea how to answer this question. But the one thing that comes to mind, I guess, professionally, I'm working on climate adaptation, right? And that's about being able to bend and move and not get knocked down. And I know there are a lot of amazing trees out there that can really take the hits, right, and come back up. But the only one I can think of is a weeping willow. I don't know why. Something that can really blow in the wind and just kind of adapt and keep on going. So I don't know. Maybe you guys can help me, which is a better northwest kind of tree that can handle the wind and very resilient. Definitely. Limber pine? Yeah, limber. Okay, I'll be a limber.
Limber pine. All right. All right. Well, with that, let's go ahead and give a big round of applause for our panelists. Thank you so much to each of you for giving us such great presentations, but also for answering our questions in the Q&A. And we didn't get to all the questions in the Q&A, and I do appreciate everyone submitting those questions. We'll make sure that our panelists do get those. And maybe if you sign up for the newsletter, you'll get those from Cascadia Climate Action. And just as a reminder, Cascadia Climate Action is all about action, taking action on behalf of the climate. You learned about a lot of things that we all can do on behalf of the climate, on behalf of the trees. And I encourage you all to continue to learn about those things tonight and into the future. Please see all of our great organizations tabling over here before you leave and learn what you can do on behalf of the climate. I know it is late, so I just want to say in closing, thank you so much to our speakers, Ali, Laura, and Joey. Thank you so much to the Cascadia Climate Action volunteers for being out here tonight. And of course, thank you to Pepper Brewing for offering us this space and allowing us to be here tonight. So with that, I would just say thank you so much to all of you, and we'll see you at the next Cascadia Climate Action Climate Science on Tap event. Check out the website. Also, check out our YouTube channel. All of our events, including this one, posted on our YouTube channel. You can learn a lot about all of the various events we've had in the past. And by going to Cascadia Climate Action, you'll be able to learn about the events coming up in the future and other things that you can do to take action on behalf of the climate. So thank you very much, everybody.
Hey, Joey,
Yeah.
you might be interested in where your